Welcome to my custom track series where I create a custom track and guide you through the general workflow and step-by-step process on how to do it yourself. It's not really intended as a tutorial, but I'll be going over each and every step pretty in depth, so you might find it fairly helpful throughout all stages. I've created a to-do list here, which is on screen detailing all the steps that I'll be going through. They'll be ticked off and adjusted throughout the series. Each episode will cover one or two of the bullet pointed concepts. Some will be longer, some shorter, whatever. Depends on how long it takes me. If you have any questions about the process, feel free to ask in the comments. I'll try my best to respond to all of them. Here's a list of all the software I'll be using. All links will be in the description for the latest downloads, and I'll explain each and every one as they appear, and give a decent-ish explanation on how to use them. Thanks for watching. Alright, so now that we're in Blender, a couple important things to note. This is assuming that you've seen my previous video and you know just the basics of how track creation works. If you haven't, go ahead and watch that. I need the views. Anyway, so we've got our layout and we use the import images as planes add-on that you can find in the preferences tab. So yeah, we're putting the track together with the subdivision surface modifier and control right clicking to give us like a general road layout. It's good for creating more natural roads, like dirt paths and that sort of stuff. So the topology of the subdivision surface isn't entirely important. It gets retopologized when you apply the modifier anyway, so don't worry if you're not entirely efficient with it basically. So yeah, we're going to leave the bridge out now because that can get modelled later, and the big section with the bell tower, we can do that later. So apply the modifier, just check to see how it looks, adjust it if it's necessary. Sometimes it just creates weird topology, but it should be all good. Now we're creating the big main section of the track with a tower. We're just going to use a plane, subdivide it a couple of times and attach it to the main. Topology is not going to be the best, but I don't really care, because it shouldn't be too bad in game, it's all flat. So yeah, just minor adjustments as well, making sure everything looks fine. When you're creating a track, I find it's a lot easier if you actually just have a reference of something that you want to create the track based on. So this time around, I'm making a track based on a POTUS from Sonic Unleashed. It's the first level, so which gives us just a baseline of how the visuals will look. I've used Dolphin's dump textures mode as well to take textures from the actual track, or the actual level even. So we've got references here. You can import them using Blender's just general importer. Just creates empties and puts them around the track. I'm working on a laptop, so if you have a double or a second monitor, you can just put them up on there. It doesn't really matter. But this is just easier for me right now. So yeah, once you're happy with the layout, you can start working on some of the decorations and the actual design. I'm using the offset edges add-on, which you can find if you go to edit preferences, and it should be mesh edit tools or something like that. There's one built in, but you can also go online and download it. The link will be in the description. It's basically the same thing. And make sure when you're creating a track, you use Blender's versions before 4.0, because otherwise later add-ons that we're going to be using won't work correctly. So yeah, now we're just adding fences and just starting to get the decoration looking right. We're not going to texture until all of the model's done. Sometimes I like to texture before just to get a good feel of the track, but I think for this time we're just going to be fine with it. Don't worry if you mess up your design, because you can always use proportional editing later on. It's that little circle next to the snapping tool, which is the magnet. To actually create the bell tower that you can see in the background of some of the reference images. There's a couple of them just hanging around. I wanted to have one big one that you can drive through with a shortcut that we're going to be modelling later on. So I'm going to be using like loop cuts and just moving the mesh around to give it that curved feel. So yeah, the smooth shading tool can create some weird looking shadows, but once you actually get in game, it shouldn't look too weird, so we're just going to ignore it for now. Just some minor adjustments here. We're going to change this a bit later on anyway. So now we're going to move on to this next section, try and create like a little shortcut area here. Just for like it's important to not make your track too static. You want to give the player some places where they can have shortcuts, because otherwise it just gets a little bit boring and repetitive. Just to keep experimenting, add stuff to it and see what works. Yeah, just adding a couple more references here. We're going to try and create the bridge section now. Doesn't have to be exact. Like if you have a reference, don't try and make it exact. Just see what works, see what's easiest, and just try and make it looking like recognizable enough. It doesn't have to be exactly one to one, because otherwise you waste your time trying to make it look amazing. Yeah, just keep making sure the normals aren't messed up. You want the collision part, so where the driver will like actually be able to interact with the blue face. So all the roads will need to be blue facing up and walls, etc. If you do that as you're modelling, it makes it easier, so you don't have to go back and just work it out later. So yeah, here I'm just kind of struggling, seeing what works. Don't be afraid to experiment. So yeah, here I realised the bridge is slightly too small, so I'm sort of moving these curved thingies to the middle to make them more pronounced in the actual track. So yeah, edge sliding is a really useful tool as well. If you double tap G, you can slide an edge along the normals, and if you press C as well, you can unlock it so you can make it go out as well as in. You'll see me using that a fair amount during this track creation. Just keep adding loop cuts with Control R, extruding just to give it a little extra depth and detail. You can be pretty, you don't have to be too conservative with try count. So for Mario Kart Wii, I always advise not to worry about polygon count unless you notice the lag. So usually people tend to aim for 20,000 or so, but honestly it depends on other sections of the track, and that would be more likely to cause lag than the actual polygon count. But if you're worried, just try and keep it under 20,000, it'll probably be fine. So here on this section I was going to have like a mushroom gorge sort of gap cut. You can see me sort of attempting that here, but it didn't really end up working out how I was liking it to, and I sort of applied the modifier too early. I forgot to add the height difference, so you'll see me adjust it later into just a standard turn. Yeah, I lift it here, give it a bit of an angle to make it slightly more interesting. So figuring out the best approach. Make sure you manually adjust it as well, just to make sure that the curve is enough where it will feel smooth. If you have a curved section like that, if it goes straight into a different angle right away, it's going to feel awkward for the player. So make sure you adjust it. And don't be scared to try and figure out some variety with the track width as well. If everything is just one width, you see this a lot with older like SketchUp tracks. The road tends to be the same width, and it just makes it really easy to get repetitive and boring. My track's not a great my track's not really a great example of this. A lot of it is the same sort of width, but we're going to be going ahead and adding more interesting stuff, like there's a split path and some shortcuts as well, which will hopefully break it up a little bit more. So here I start to add a bit of the decoration. You can use control right click to add extra vertices, and then you can fill in everything using F. It's a good way just to make standard like grass and stuff that doesn't have to have great topology to feel smooth. So yeah, control T to triangulate, and then alt J to turn it into quads. Sometimes will make it easier to like edit and stuff. Just adding more references here to give me a good idea of what I want the actual track to look like. You see I'm going to model the fences here. They're pretty simplistic, so just a couple of cuboids. So now I'm going to use a couple more modifiers as well to actually create like the fence itself. Notably the array and curve modifiers, which you can use for creating road as well. If you need like uniform and neat roads, it's more useful than subdivision surface, which can sometimes be a bit too smooth and sort of natural looking. You'll see me use it later on when I create one of the shortcuts. So here you can just see me playing around with it. Yeah, if you have big twists and turns in your curve, you want to make sure that in the curve settings the twist method is set to Z up instead of minimum, because otherwise it is not going to work well. Especially with roads, it'll make the roads really curved and awkward to drive on. So here we're just extruding the curve with E, making sure it actually like looks fine, increasing the count on the array. I think I end up being pretty happy with how that is. Might adjust it later on. Yeah, here now we're creating some grass. You can see here the sometimes when you use offset edges, you create these little overlaps. Just adjust them manually with scale and G to move. So now I'm creating the mountain. A lot of it is just experimenting with what looks fine. Stuff like that. So here I'm going to create some like overhanging grass. using control right click as well to just create quick, easy terrain that looks fine. The further away you get from the track, the more you can sort of get away with taking shortcuts for the actual design. So here a tricky thing was trying to get this grass to like blend into the road and the bridge. You don't want it, especially for like natural tracks like this where there's a lot of like rock and grass and stuff. You don't want it to look too weird because it sort of breaks immersion. Something to keep in mind. So here we're just going to add the cliff face. Keep extruding it down. We're not going to add the water until the end. So here we're going to add the grass on top of the hill. Don't have to worry too much about topology when adding grass again. We're going to be using just regular unwrapping to texture it. Nothing fancy, so here I want to have some variety with the cliff faces, so we're going to make one that's slightly smaller. You'll see me adjust it in a second. Yeah, there we go. Probably go back and create some actual variation in the faces of the rocks itself, just to give it a more natural feel. So yeah, it's all just about adjustment, making sure it looks right. You see me sort of struggle with that here. Don't be afraid to just take your time, just to get make sure that something actually looks, you know, as good as you need it to be. So yeah, just experimenting with shading smooth and finding out what works the best. Yeah, another overlap here. You just sort of have to manually adjust it. It's not the end of the world. Pretty easy to fix most of the time. Just make sure to actually go and fix it, because otherwise it will look really strange. You can be a bit more conservative on detail on like stuff like the cliff edges there, because the player's never going to realistically see the back of that cliff, so you don't have to particularly worry about it. Here is when I start trying to create one of the windmills that you can see in the reference images. I got a little bit bored with just creating terrain, so I thought I'd give it a go. They're pretty simple, so it shouldn't be the hardest thing, but you'll see me adjust it a fair amount. So just using offset edges to give it some actual detail. Now I'm going to try and model each of the, I don't even know what you'd call those, but you know what I mean. I'm going to try and model each of them, but I figure out eventually that it doesn't work. So just figuring out what actually would work the best, I think I landed on a texture in the end, which I can do in the B-res. Yeah, I spend a lot of time just making this, and then I sort of realise it doesn't work, and I get rid of all of it. Yeah, there's a lot of manual work here, just to come to that realization. But that's sort of how it goes. Don't be afraid to experiment. If something doesn't work, it doesn't work, right? A lot of it is just about puzzle solving, finding out what works, and adjusting accordingly. It's probably an easier way to do this as well, but yeah, I put it in here and I extrude it, and you know, I'm not particularly happy with how it looks, which is fine. You're not always going to come up with the greatest ideas. So yeah, I'll turn it into a texture instead and create the little pole that connects it. But yeah, once you actually figure it out, and get your decorations, don't be afraid to just duplicate them about. Which is what I end up doing here. I place a couple just to make the track feel more alive. You can play with the scale and the placement as well, just to make them not look like identical copies of each other. So here I think I decided to start working on the actual town itself, which is good because a lot of the, you can see a lot of the houses there are just shapes. They're very easy to actually create. So you can have a little fun just working out or finding out what works. See there the sort of creating the little houses. You can duplicate them around as well. Once you make one, there's no point making it again, so a lot of them are just squares, so it's very easy to edit. You might find that the decoration for your track will be a lot harder to do. I just chose something simple for this one. Sort of just show off all the tools that I wanted to show off. Use offset edges here to create just a little more path, so you can have a bit more lenience. You might find it easier to wait until after you've textured each of the houses and stuff to duplicate them around, because I'm sort of coming to the realization as I edit this that I'm going to actually have to go back and texture all of the houses individually, which is probably going to be quite time consuming, so you might want to wait until after you finish texturing. So here I try and use the grid fill tool. It's pretty useful, and bridge edge loops, but it doesn't end up working, so sometimes you just have to do it manually. Create like an arch for the entrance to the little village. Just playing around, seeing what works. So here I decided to place a little house in this small section, but I think I'm going to go back and change that because I'm not entirely happy with how it looks. But it works right now, so we can leave it. We'll add extra decoration to the house, like you can see there, they've got bushes and like doors and windows. So we can always go back and change it, make it look a bit better. We'll see what works. So here we're just gonna extrude all this stuff. Add a couple edge loops. That'll make texturing a little bit easier. I haven't decided what I want to add to that section yet, so I'm going to leave it fairly open. So yeah, sometimes if you sort of get bored of editing a section, don't be afraid to just go to a completely different area and just do something else. I find that forcing yourself through something that you don't particularly want to do just means that you end up just quitting the track as a whole and it never gets finished. So yeah, we can use the bevel tool. If you select an edge and then Control B, you can use the scroll wheel to create more segments. Just makes it look a bit more curved and natural, I suppose. Yeah, just deleting stuff that the player's not going to see to free up a bit of the try count. It's not overly important for this track. I think right now I'm setting about 5,000, so it's well below the threshold. But we're going to have a lot of moving parts and custom objects and stuff like that. So yeah, just be mindful about it. So yeah, inset edges using I as well is really easy. Really handy to create extra detail. So yeah, here I'm going to add a little section. I'm going to reuse the section that I had over on the other side of the track. I'm going to use it, maybe place an item box or something special in there. You have to go quite out of your way to get it, so giving the player a little less incentive to go up there. Yeah, you don't have to be too, you don't have to stick to your layout. If you think of something that you want to add or you want to change, go ahead and do it. The layout's not, you know, it's never a final thing. So it's not particularly important to stick to it. It's always good to have one before you start working on a track though, just to, you know, just to make sure that you know what you're doing. Have a rough idea of how the track's going to look. So yeah, here I finally notice that I still have textured mode on, even though I don't have any textures, so it was really bright and hard to work with. But I finally fix it now. So yeah, here I'm going to start to add the shortcut up through the bell tower. I think initially I just try and use control and right click, but I sort of realise it's not going to be smooth enough, so I use array and curve. I make the curve out of the mesh that I use here, which is a pretty handy feature. If you select the edges and then separate them with P, you can, in object mode, you can convert it to a curve, which makes adding curves quite useful, or quite easy if you have like a mesh you really want to use. So yeah, here I notice it's slightly too high, so I'm going to lower it. It's going to look less like it does in Sonic Unleashed, but that's fine. You can take some creative liberties. I'm not your boss. So yeah, just adjusting it, making sure it actually looks alright. Coming up to the end of the first part now, I think it stops after I create this shortcut. There's still plenty more to come. Track's nowhere near finished. So yeah, here I create I try and figure out how to do it, but I realise I have to do it in object mode. So here we go, I create the curve, delete the mesh, and then add an array and curve. Now I think I just sort of struggled to get the curve looking exactly how I want it to. You might notice that the rotation's slightly off, or yeah, like here. So you just have to play around with it until you can get the curve working exactly how you want it to. I forgot how much I struggled. So yeah, make sure you have the origin set. So if you right click in object mode and then set origin to mesh or geometry. Yeah, this is why it's not a tutorial. I spend a lot of time trying to figure out why it's not working. And I think it is just simple rotation. So yeah, I'll probably go back and add a couple more segments in a second because it's not particularly smooth. Making sure that the twist method's set to Z up. So yeah, we can smooth the curve using the smooth tool. By just selecting it, right clicking, clicking smooth. So yeah, that's part 1. We're going to come back later with part 2 and sort of finish the model. Part 3 onwards will be creating the actual track itself. So thank you for watching, I hope you learned something.